I had gone up to do 2 pilots for game shows before. One of them was called Ooh La La. And one of the guests on the pilot was Barbara Walters. And there were several others. Then there was another game show, and I have now forgotten what its premise was. But the point was, once you get into doing a couple of these pilots, you're in play. And so a man named Don Lips had seen some of the pilots that did not go, and he had this idea. He was working for Dick Cavett. It was Daphne Productions, and Dick Cavett owned that. And he had this idea for a show. It was an absolutely flamboyant, huge game show, huge physically, called The Money Maze. And so he called me up in I guess it was August of 1974, and asked if I would come up and do the audition for it, rather the pilot for it. He already saw the tape. Went up, did the pilot in August. I didn't hear anything more. Didn't hear anything about it until, September went by, October went by. I guess it must have been early November, and I had already written it off. That was all over. And Don called and said, well, we're on. We're going on the air Christmas week of 1974. And he said, come on up and we'll get to work. And we did. The first show we did, it took 3 days to do one show. This is a huge show. For those who have never seen it, it was a maze. It was a life-size maze. But in order for it to work, you had to be able to see into the maze. So they had to build the whole setup. All of the audience had to be on risers 14 feet above ground. The same thing with the crow's nest from which the participants worked, and the area where I did my emceeing, and all of the other stuff. It was just enormous. It was done at ABC at their largest studio.
And the cameras had to be higher.
And the cameras were all up too. And they had a one flat overhead camera, just straight down. It was an amazing show. And it took us forever to do the first one. And finally we had to get it down to where we could do 5 in a day, and 10 over a weekend, so that we could do it twice a month and it went on the air.
What was the concept?
Concept is this. You have a couple, almost always a married couple. And usually it was the woman who would stand in the crow's nest looking down into this maze. The partner would have to run through this maze, which was changed after every game. There was a pattern that changed after every game. And they would have to run through this maze and get to 4 pillars. Each pillar had a button on the side, and if you hit the button, lights would light up on the top of this pillar. It would be a 0 and a 0 and a 0 and a 0. It was for $10,000. And it would be, and the last, and this is 1974, $10,000, pretty good piece of cash. And then there was the 1. You had to get the 1, or you just had a bunch of zeros. So the 1 would be in the most difficult position and the person up in the crow's nest would be trying to direct the spouse through this maze to get to each pillar. If they got to all in this determined period of time, then they won the $10,000. And it got pretty lively. It was, and the husbands would get mad at the wives, and the wives would get mad at the husbands because, now imagine this, you're looking down, you're saying, go to your right, go to your right. Well, your right, if they're coming back at you, is no longer your right, it's their left. You see, so it got pretty confusing, and some people got pretty mad. One man bashed his way all the way through the plyboard maze and dislocated his shoulder. Today he would own ABC. In those days, and they would, finally one lady, she hit out all 4 zeros, and she was looking down at him, and he hadn't gotten to the 1. And she said, Sidney, get the hell out of the goddamn maze.